In 1978, Kevin Strickland was convicted of a triple murder he didn't commit. He was 18 years old, barely out of childhood. The actual killers told authorities he wasn't there. There was no physical evidence, no DNA, nothing. And yet, Kevin spent 43 years in a Missouri prison, longer than most people have been alive. When he finally walked free at 62, the state handed him nothing. No money, no apology, not even a toothbrush. But what happened next started with a $25 donation from a stranger who had never met him. And it didn't stop there. I've spent the last several weeks going deep into every court document and testimony in this case, and what those documents reveal is that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. While Missouri turned its back on Kevin, over 13,000 strangers decided they wouldn't, and together they did something the state never could. But to understand why that matters, we first need to go back to 1978, because the way Kevin ended up in that courtroom is the most overlooked part of this story, and once you hear it, you'll understand why it took 43 years to undo. The way Kevin Strickland ended up convicted is by far the most important part of this story, and yet it's the part most people never hear. It's April 25, 1978, Kansas City, Missouri. 4 people are inside a house on Olive Street. 3 of them, Sherry Black, 22, Larry Ingram, 21, John Walker, 20, is about to be murdered. The 4th, a woman named Cynthia Douglas, is Larry Ingram's girlfriend. She survives, but only because she does something remarkable in the middle of chaos. She plays dead. The attackers ransacked the house. All the victims were tied up and then shot. Douglas was shot in the leg but stayed completely still until the killers left. Then she crawled out of the house. Think about that for a second. This woman, bleeding from a gunshot wound, was lying completely still among the bodies of her friends, waiting for killers to leave. She is the only living witness to what happened that night. And what she says next, or more accurately, what police make her say next, is going to destroy an innocent man's life for 43 years. Here's what Cynthia Douglas actually told police when they first interviewed her. She named 2 men she knew, Kilm Adkins and Vincent Bell. She said she could not identify anyone else beyond those 2. That's it, 2 names, men she knew, men who were actually there. But Kevin Strickland's name was not on that list. So where did his name come from? Kevin Strickland was 18 years old. He lived 2 houses down from where the murders took place. He said he was home that night, watching television and talking on the phone. The next morning, the police showed up and started accusing him of the murders. He had a family alibi. He had not been at the scene. And the physical evidence didn't point to him either. A fingerprint found on the shotgun used in the murders belonged to someone other than Kevin. That person has never been identified. But here's where it gets sinister. Police found a fingerprint belonging to Kevin on Vincent Bell's car. Kevin said this was because he had ridden in the car before, and that the last time he had seen Adkins and Bell was at 5 or 6 in the evening, hours before the murders happened. That fingerprint on a car, that's what they had, not a weapon, not a witness placing him at the scene, not a single piece of physical evidence ties him to 3 dead bodies, just a fingerprint on a friend's car. So what did the Kansas City police do? They needed Cynthia Douglas to change her story. Douglas said police told her, just pick Strickland out of the lineup and we'll be done. It will all go away. You don't have to worry about these guys anymore. Read that again. A woman who had just survived a mass shooting, who had been shot herself, who had lain among the bodies of her friends waiting to die, was sitting in a police station being told by detectives to just pick a name and it would all go away. A lawsuit later filed against the Kansas City Police Department said officers pushed the case's only witness into identifying Strickland and built up false evidence to support her identification. When they tried to get Kevin to confess and he refused, because he was innocent, they made up statements and claimed he had said them. They tried to get Kevin to confess, he wouldn't, because he had nothing to confess to. So they went back to Cynthia Douglas, and eventually, under pressure, she picked Kevin Strickland out of a lineup. Now there's something else you need to understand about why that identification was so dangerous. Douglas had said Strickland was the man holding the shotgun, but the fingerprint lifted from that shotgun in 1978 did not match Kevin. The jury never heard that explained clearly. What they heard was one eyewitness saying she saw Kevin Strickland with the murder weapon, And one final detail that shows just how shaky this case really was. Strickland and Bell looked very similar. They were both short, with light skin and similar hairstyles. One investigator later said it was not a perfect match, but the resemblance was striking enough to give her pause. A pressured eyewitness, a mistaken identification, made-up statements, no physical evidence, no DNA, a fingerprint on a car. That's what they took to trial. And what happened in that courtroom is where this story gets even darker. But the trial itself, that's just the first piece of the puzzle. Because what happened inside that courtroom wasn't just a mistake. It was a system working exactly as designed against a man who never stood a chance. Kevin Strickland went to trial in 1979. And the first thing you need to know is that his first trial didn't result in a conviction. The jury in his first trial deadlocked. 11 jurors voted guilty. 1 held out. That one juror was the only black person on the panel, and he voted not guilty. One person. One juror looked at the evidence, one or the lack of it, and said no, not guilty. That single person stood between Kevin Strickland and a life sentence. So what did the prosecution do? According to Strickland, after that trial ended, the prosecutor walked up to his lawyer and said, "I'll make sure this doesn't happen next time." And they kept that promise. Kevin's lawyer said the prosecutor used every one of his removal choices to strike black jurors from the panel. The next trial had an all-white jury. Think about what that means. In a case where a young black man is accused of murder, where the entire case rests on the testimony of one witness who was pushed into identifying him, the prosecution made sure there would not be a single black juror who could relate to his experience, question the police story, or hold out the way that first juror did. Kevin Strickland was convicted of 1 count of capital murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder by an all-white jury in his second trial. He was 18 years old, and this is the part of the story that haunts everything that comes after it. Because from that moment on, Kevin Strickland began doing what innocent people in prison do. He fought, over and over and over again. He filed appeal after appeal. He said he was innocent every single year. He never stopped saying he wasn't there. But the system just ignored him and kept moving. Courts threw out his claims. Evidence sat in boxes. Cynthia Douglas, the only witness, the woman whose words had put him there, was quietly trying to undo what she had done. In 2009, she emailed the Midwest Innocence Project and wrote, "I am seeking info on how to help someone who was wrongfully accused. I was the only eyewitness, and things were not clear back then. But now I know more and would like to help this person if I can." She didn't even name Kevin directly in that email. But what she meant was clear. This woman, the sole reason Kevin Strickland was in prison, was reaching out to anyone who would listen, trying to fix what she had been pushed into doing. The email didn't identify Strickland by name. An attorney at the organization wrote back, asking Douglas to have the person contact them directly. Their rules didn't allow them to help someone unless that person made the request themselves. Douglas never wrote back. A rule, a technicality, and the chance slipped away. Without holding any hearings, a court threw out Kevin's petition in July 2013. And then in 2015, Cynthia Douglas died, the one living witness who could have spoken on Kevin's behalf, the woman who had spent years privately telling friends and family that she had been pressured and made a mistake. She was gone. She had tried several times to take back her testimony before she died. The courts knew this. Multiple people had signed statements saying Douglas had told them privately she made a mistake. Her husband said that after Vincent Bell entered his plea in 1979, naming his actual accomplices, Douglas became convinced she had identified the wrong man. According to her husband, she tried to tell prosecutors. They turned her away. So let's be completely clear about what the timeline looks like at this point. 1979. Kevin was convicted on pressured testimony, no physical evidence after the prosecution removed every black juror. 1979. The actual killers named their actual accomplices. Kevin is not one of them. Late 1970s and onward, Cynthia Douglas privately tells people she made a mistake. She is carrying this every single day. 2009. She tries to contact the Midwest Innocence Project, get a form letter back. 2013. Courts throw out Kevin's petition without a single hearing. 2015. Douglas dies. Kevin is still in prison, still innocent, still waiting. Kevin Strickland's case became the longest wrongful imprisonment in Missouri history, and one of the longest in the entire country. And he was still there, still in a cell, still innocent, growing older every single year while the system that put him there looked the other way. Then something changed. In 2020, the Kansas City Star published a major investigative series on Kevin's case. Journalists did what the courts hadn't. They dug in. They looked at the evidence. They talked to people. And the story they told sparked something. After running its own investigation, the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office said in May 2021 that new evidence had destroyed the case against Strickland and that he was factually innocent. Not probably innocent, not possibly innocent, factually innocent. A 3-day hearing followed. The actual killers submitted statements. Both Vincent Bell and Kil Madkins, the men who actually carried out the murders, said Kevin Strickland was not with them that night. A former Missouri Supreme Court Chief Justice testified, 12 witnesses in total. And on November 23, 2021, a judge wrote that his confidence in Strickland's conviction was so damaged it could not stand, and overturned it. Kevin Strickland walked out of the Western Missouri Correctional Center in a wheelchair. While in prison, he had suffered multiple heart attacks. The state never paid for what it did to his body either. He was 62 years old. He had spent more than 4 decades of his life, his entire adult life, behind bars for something he did not do. He told reporters he had heard the news from a break during a soap opera. He was watching inside. Other inmates started cheering, banging on walls, and making noise throughout the building. When he stepped outside, he was greeted by his family, and he said something that has stayed with people ever since. "I'm not necessarily angry. It's a lot. Joy, sorrow, fear. I am trying to figure out how to put them together." 43 years of his life, joy, sorrow, and fear. But the state of Missouri wasn't finished with Kevin Strickland yet, because walking out of prison was only the first thing they let him do for free. What the state of Missouri did next, or more accurately what it refused to do, is perhaps the most quietly devastating part of this entire story. Kevin Strickland had just served 43 years for a crime he didn't commit, and Missouri had a law on the books that made what they were about to do completely legal. The number they were prepared to hand him was $0, not reduced, not delayed. 0. And that single number is what turned his release from a moment of justice into something that exposed the full cruelty of the system. Kevin Strickland walked out of prison without a toothbrush. That's not a metaphor. That's not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. He walked out with nothing, no supplies, no clothing, no toiletries. He had to buy the basics from scratch. No money, no apology, no word from the state of Missouri that it had taken 43 years of his life and owed him anything at all. And here's the law that made this cruelty possible. Missouri only pays back a small group of prisoners, those cleared through DNA evidence. And even in those rare cases, the payment was capped at $36,000 per year. That sounds like a lot, but can you put a price on 43 years of your life? And Kevin didn't even qualify for that, because his case was built on a pressured eyewitness, statements from the actual killers, and a complete lack of physical evidence, not DNA. His attorney put it plainly. Most people who are cleared of crimes are cleared without DNA, because most crimes don't involve DNA at all. In Missouri, she said, those people come home and receive nothing. Nothing. That is the official position of the state of Missouri on 43 years of a man's life. Even the prosecutor who fought to free him said publicly that Strickland had been wrongfully held for 43 years and had not received a single cent from the state, and that paying him would simply be the right thing, the just thing to do. Even the prosecutor who fought to free him was calling out the state she represented. For comparison, consider this. Kansas, the state right next door, had a law that paid cleared prisoners $65,000 for every year they were wrongfully locked up, plus housing help, school tuition, money training, counseling, and the ability to clear their record. Kansas had decided that when the government destroys someone's life, it owes them something real. Missouri had not. And Kevin Strickland, at 62 years old, with no work history, no retirement savings, no social security built up, and serious health problems from decades in prison, This man was set free with nothing. So let's think about what nothing actually means in real life. Kevin Strickland had never filed a tax return as an adult. He had never paid into Social Security. He had no job history. The work he might have done, the money he might have saved, the relationships he might have built, the life he might have lived, every single piece of it was taken. He uses a wheelchair. His attorney said plainly, at 62 with physical problems, he was not going to be able to work the way most people coming home from prison could. He was walking into a world that had completely changed from the one he left as a teenager. Smartphones, the internet, a totally different economy, and he was doing it without a single dollar of state support. But this is where something extraordinary happened. The world found out, and the world decided it was not going to let this stand. Kevin's attorney had set up a GoFundMe back in June 2021, when it first looked like he might be freed. By the time he actually walked out in November, the fund had raised around $38,000. Then the judge announced his release. That same day, the number nearly doubled, and then it just took off. Within 2 days, strangers had donated over $1 million. More than 13,000 people gave what they could, most of them small amounts. The largest single donation, $10,000, came from a pediatric medical practice in Kansas City, Missouri. A doctor's office that treats children. People who looked at this story and gave $10,000. People left messages on the page. One donor who gave $25 wrote that nothing would bring back the 43 years that were stolen, but that seeing so much love shown to Kevin, after seeing so much hate in the world, had brought them to tears. Strangers from across the country. People who had never met Kevin Strickland. People who would never meet Kevin Strickland. Sending $10, sending $25, sending whatever they could, because they understood something Missouri's lawmakers apparently couldn't, that when the state takes 43 years from an innocent man, someone has to make it right. His attorney said Missouri was not going to pay Kevin Strickland a single dime, but that the whole world was going to make sure he was taken care of. The fundraiser eventually raised over $1.6 million. People looked into donating airline miles and hotel stays so Kevin could visit the ocean, something he said he wanted to do. A local real estate developer began exploring ways to get him a real home, a place where he could feel safe, find his footing, and slowly get used to the world again. Kevin Strickland was invited to light the mayor's Christmas tree at Crown Center in Kansas City. The mayor said he was honored to have Kevin flip the switch and asked the whole city to join the moment. An innocent man who had spent 4 decades in a prison cell, who had watched the world change through a small television, who had written appeals year after year that went nowhere, stood in front of a crowd of people in Kansas City and turned on the Christmas lights. But Kevin was clear-eyed about what the donations did and didn't mean. He said that while the support meant everything to him, it didn't change who was actually responsible. The courts had failed him, and they were the ones who should have been working to make his life more comfortable. He wasn't wrong, because in April 2023, Kevin Strickland took the next step. He filed a lawsuit against the Kansas City Police Department in Jackson County Circuit Court, seeking compensation for his wrongful conviction. The lawsuit said KCPD officers made up evidence to implicate Strickland and built a false case against him, violating his civil rights, including his right to due process and his right not to be charged without real cause. One of his attorneys said it plainly. The only evidence ever used against Kevin Strickland was the product of police wrongdoing. The man who walked out of prison with nothing, the man the state refused to pay, the man who had been pushed into a wrongful conviction at 18 years old. He wasn't done fighting. He was never done fighting. But more than the lawsuit, more than the $1 million strangers sent him, more than the Christmas lights he finally got to turn on, what stays with you is this. Kevin Strickland spent 43 years telling the truth inside a system that didn't want to hear it. And he never stopped. Not once. That's not a legal outcome. That's a man. Kevin Strickland's case didn't just expose one broken system. It exposed every layer of the machine that's supposed to protect us. And the question it leaves behind is simple, and it has no good answer. How many Kevin Strickland are still in there right now, telling the truth to a system that doesn't want to hear it? But there is something about cases like Kevin's that most people never think about. Something is hiding just underneath the surface of every story like this one. Because Kevin's case got attention. Kevin's case got a newspaper investigation. Kevin's case got a prosecutor willing to fight for him. Most cases like his don't. And the question of why some innocent people get out while others never do, that answer is darker and more specific than you might think. If you want to understand how the system decides whose innocence gets taken seriously and whose doesn't, watch this video next. I'll see you there.